Hey guys, Dave Ashenbrenner here. Today I have a special little treat for you. If you've been following my videos, you've seen me do the part 1 and part 2 on the Tronkinstein X3S, where I evaluated it first, and then we went through and fixed some of the shortcomings with it. And I've gone beyond that now. I had a slight problem where the Z position wouldn't save, and we did a real intensive in-depth look at that, and it looked like the processor chip kept counting up, so it didn't know where Z was. We watched as the processor chip went from its Z0 position and just kept going and going and going, and so I figured, why monkey with this thing any longer? I had evaluated the board, or at least looked at the board when we pulled the cover off in the first video. And I kind of made reference to it. The board looked very nice, and I recognized a couple things about the board. It was basically the same layout as the ramps, as the new ramps, 1.4 version 1.5, and I actually went and bought one of those, and we're going to do a conversion today, converting this to the ramps 1.5. The 1.5 will give us the ability to put a TFT 2.8 or 3.2 touchscreen on it, and we're going to need to update the firmware in the touchscreen as well as the firmware in the ramps board. The ramps board, for anybody that's not familiar, you CR10 guys out there, it's basically where CR10 has been taking their S board. It has the pinout and the ability to have a low filament detector, stop and pause. If you run out of filament, it will stop, hold its position, keep everything heated, so that when you refill the filament or change it out, it will continue the print. This is pretty handy. As I found out, I bought a S5. This is not a 5S. This is an S5, what they call a custom. My introduction to the ramps board was that machine, and I had a lot of problems with it, and dug into it, and that's really what taught me a lot about boards and the ramps board and things. And we're going to have a neat little thing where we're going to build this machine into something that it never was intended to be with the ramps board, and we'll put a touch screen on it. We'll put that TFT touchscreen on it, and we're going to have a little bit of fun with it. I'm going to call this my Tronkinstein, where we're going to make this into a way better machine. We're going to put a different brain in it, so to speak. So, but we're going to go through this, and I'm not sure whether I'll be able to do this, because I want to do this real in depth for anyone who wants to do this change out. I'm not going to zip through it and talk fast and speed everything up. I want you to identify which pins we're pinning into. We're going to put the low filament unit on here. You don't need anybody special unified software or any nonsense on this thing. We're going to go strictly what's available out there. I'm going to pin it out to what the norm is, what they do when they pin one of these boards out to that. And we're going to have some fun. Stick with me, and we're going to go mechanical on you, but today we're going to go digital on you. So stick with me, and we're going to get this thing settled together. And thanks for stopping in. Hello, fellow colleagues. This is Herr Tronkinstein, and by the time we are done with this little experiment today, you will be calling me Dr. Tronkinstein. You will be calling me the doctor. What we are attempting to do today is to take the TronXY idiot brain, and we are going to replace it with a Ramps genius brain. And along with that, we are going to put in a touch screen, because this is capable of many things. You will notice the size of the processor chip and the tiny processor chip of the Tronkinstein brain. So follow me on this experiment. I will go through it. By the time we are done, you will be able to do this experiment on your own. This is Dr. Tronkinstein. Thank you. Here we go. Igor, bring in the brain. I think I went too far when I hired the handicap this time. Thank you, Igor. Oh, the ramp's brain. It's alive. Alive, I tell you, alive. Igor, turn on the switch. Yes, master. Igor, turn on the switch. The switch? Igor, turn on the damn switch. It's alive! Alive, I tell you, alive! Igor, come in here! Okay, for anybody that's seen the first video, part one, you'll recognize this is the stock TronXY board. And what I did was I very carefully taped and marked each of these wires going into it. It's probably not necessary. They're pretty easy to identify. It's all marked on the new ramps board where they go. But if you've never done this before, this is just a kind of a little cheat sheet thing to do for you. And we're going to just start identifying where these wires go today. And we're going to pull the ramps board out and we're going to do a quick little comparison with them. I've got that right here. This is brand new, still in the package. Hope they ship me the right one this time. You'll want to make sure that you got the V1.5. The ramps 1.4 is not the same board, nor is the 1.3 board on here. So beware of that when you get it in. The other thing to look for, there's some cheap boards on the market. The one that came with my original CR10 was not the maker base board, and this thing is beautiful compared to the board that came with my first CR10. So, okay, and you can identify, you can see where your USB goes in right here, and you'll see a couple little things on here if you look closely. First of all the mounting holes line up on this, and that's also not typical with any of the other ramps boards. This is the MKS base version 1.5, and just make sure you're getting the maker base, because I've had other boards and all the transistors and all of the chips and everything were crooked in it, and the real poor soldering job. In fact, my first one was failed because of a result of a poor soldering connection on it. So here's your board. This has got the 2560 processor in it. If you just want to take a look at that and compare that to this, that's the 2560, and incidentally, that is the same processor that they're using on the new CR10s. The CR10 has went to the new style board. The CR10 also has, as does this one, has an extra drive for, you can see all of the drive chips. It's got 5 drive chips here. We only have 4 drives on this one, and of course they're soldered in. There's really nothing wrong with that. But we're going to go over the pinouts. Now, one thing I was about to mention, there is no card reader in this. We actually depend on the touchscreen to have the card reader in it. I'll get to that in a second. Okay, and here is the screen. This is also a Maker Base. It's important that you get the Maker Base brand because they'll match up to each other. I've never tried any of the other knockoffs of this. It's just not worth it when you're doing something, especially if you're doing it for the first time, to have something that doesn't work the way it's supposed to work. So this is a really high quality board. You can tell the way it's built right here. Same thing. And I'll flip this over, and as you will notice, it's got the SD card, the full-size SD card reader in the back of it. This is the remove after washing. This is your buzzer. It's got a buzzer which you can disable in the firmware right here. And take a look at this processor chip in here. Looks identical to the one in here. Now that's important because this is going to do all the thinking, all the processing. Now it's going to take the information from here, and it's going to do all the processing and send it to this board over here. So this is a really robust unit, and I can't say enough about it. I've had mine for about a year now, almost a year on my other machine, and I just love it. This is really the way to go. You walk up to your machine and you poke a couple buttons and away you go. However, there are a couple settings that you can't get to with this board that you have to be cognizant and set them up in your firmware, or go to enable your eprom in your firmware and do all of those changes from your eprom, which is pretty simple. Once you get it set up that way anyway, it's pretty straightforward, so there's really no difficulty there. It was just a kind of a hassle the first time I realized I didn't have those settings on my screen. It was a little disturbing, but we got past that real easily. So anyway, this is the setup that we're using today, and I'll show you how to hook these guys up, so stick with me. Okay, so we're switching these boards over, and we're going to do a real in-depth comparison before we make any moves here, because this is going to really help us out what we're doing. The first thing I noticed right off the bat, I've got these boards on top of each other, and this is the original location for the your USB port on here, and you'll see this is about maybe 30 millimeters over center to center from this one. So we're going to have to move that, and I thought this would be the best time to do that. We're going to line the old one up with the hole and move this over. We're going to make a mark in here. We're not going to cut that today, but we'll make the mark so that we can cut it. This will be mounted to the top, and the other part of the printer is over here. So we can take this in, separate these two pieces, and do our little operation on this before we put the board in or after we put it in. So okay, I'd like you guys to just look at this. This is the pinout. I'm going to call it a pinout for the connection schedule for the new board over here. I'm just going to get this situated. And I wanted to focus on basically what we've done here. And as that schedule implies, we've made a few changes here. I took the liberty of pulling these large heat sinks from here, and I pried them off, and you see there's silicone on here. They're really oversized for the drives over here. So what I did was I used these for the MOSFETs or for the transistors, and I put those on the heat bed and the extruder, and I got smaller ones and I replaced these with the smaller ones that fit a lot better. It was really overkill. And I epoxied them on, just a tiny dab of epoxy, so we don't have this. You can see how thick that silicone is, and it's doing a little bit of heat blockage there. I think it's a little more important. You can see the silicone, the thickness of the silicone actually keep spacing the heat sink away from the tops of these chips, of the drive chips. And what I've done was I just put the tiniest amount of epoxy on, little 5-minute epoxy, and mixed it up and real quick placed these on here, and I pushed them down and held them down tight against these chips here. So we should be good there. And these are the ones that I stole. I pried them off here carefully, off the board, and I put those on the heater MOSFETs on here. So we should be good with that. This doesn't have a separate MOSFET or relay on it. So I think we're going to be good there. If not, we can always replace those later. And here's a shot of the board with those replaced. I'll point them out real quick. You can see on all the drives. You can see on all the drives in here. This one. These are 3/8 by 3/8 inch, by the way. And these look like 1/2 by 1/2 inch, and they're quite a bit more robust. But you'll see the large one here for the heat bed, and the large one over here for the extruder. So that should take care of us right there. And I'll monitor the heat on these. I actually had this running. We actually hooked this up just to make sure that the screen ran on this. And we downloaded the firmware, but that's going to be in another installment of this. So we're basically ready to go. I hooked up all of my extruder, the primary Z or the Z1 on here. Let's focus in on that. Let me get you. Oh, just a little bit so you can see all of the labels on these. The XY and Z, XY, and it's labeled Z1 on the Tronski, and then we used this is the extruder, or the E over here, and this is the second Z. Now this will automatically assign this last drive to the second Z. If you don't have a second extruder on here, it will pull another Z into it. So if you just plug this in and you activate what you're using this card for, and I'll give you that information later when we go through all of the firmware and how we set this up. But this is pretty much it. These are the two bed temp and the extruder. The extruder is the far one here. These are the thermistors. The bed thermistor, there's incorrect information about what the thermistor is for the bed on this. It's actually a number 4, and the extruder is a number 1 if you go with the stock extruder on here. So it's 1 and a 4. That's very important because the bed overheats on this, and it's hard enough. This thing has a hard enough time heating up the bed with the 20 amp power supply that's in it. If you look here, I've upgraded this to a 30 amp power supply. Zoom out just a little bit. This is a 30 amp power supply, and it's quite a bit bigger. What I ended up doing was double side taping it in, and I kept these connections away from the fan over here because these wires get pretty close to the fan and they'll follow the fan up. And we're going to tie wrap these together, zip tie these together before we put this together for the last time. We're going to dispose of the screen here because we don't need it, and we're just going to use it as a chase. We're just going to use it as a chase to run this wire through. This is the connection wire for this control panel. This is your touch screen right here, and we'll do that next and put this thing together. And then I have on my printer, printing, this is a front panel that will piggyback onto the front of the Tron front panel, and it has the window opening for the 3.2 inch screen. We're going to have files for the 2.8 and the 3.2 screen available, whichever one you choose to use. They both use the same firmware. They're very similar. I opted for the larger screen. My other printer has the smaller screen on it. It really doesn't matter. It's not cumbersome to use the smaller screen. It's such a small percentage that it just doesn't matter. So given the choice, I chose the larger screen. So you can see it's pretty simple. Once we have that hookup schedule on all these wires, you really don't need these. I left these on here for display purpose, so everyone could see how I labeled them and where they went, to make it a little easier to understand and explain on here. You can see on the upper middle part of your screen, right up there, right in the center of the screen, you'll see where I notched out, and I'm actually going to use some vinyl tape to make a little combing around this, just to neaten it up a little bit. But I took a Dremel to this and I cut this out by lining up, comparing where the card went on the new and the old one, and measuring over 30, I believe it was 30 some millimeters over. And I gave myself plenty of room just for a little fudge factor here. And I also, very important on this, because you've got some exposed pins on the back of this board over here, where this tab where the machine screw goes through here. You can see the screw hole. We're not going to use that now. We're not going to pull through here because that tab will short out two of our connections on the board. So it's real important that we're just going to put a piece of tape over that so we don't accidentally stick a screw down through there and short these out. But that's kind of it. We ran it last night. I just taped this on to put it into place while we loaded the firmware in there. But we are going to proceed with removing. We're going to proceed with removing the stock LCD screen in here, and we're going to go ahead and wire. We're going to go ahead and wire the TFT 32 into that. So stick with me. Okay, and away we go. Our new touchscreen. We're just going to thread that through. I guess this gives us the option. Go right straight through the back of this, and this will be. This I'll be able to unplug and install this into that that front if I need to unplug it. I don't see a need to. And this is our. We want to make sure that we plug this into the correct port over here, and as you can see, MKS TFT screen. So that goes right there. You can see it's adjacent to the chip, the main chip here. And it's that simple. That's it right there, guys. Just plug that in. We're also going to need, before we bury this in the cover and put everything together, these are the 3 pins. I don't know if you can see these. This is your filament. These are for your filament out. These 3 pins right here. Pretty sure it's the ones on this side. I will get a, before we actually plug that in, I will get a yes, no on that. And I actually made myself a little wire right here. And in fact, we are going to get that information for you right now. Okay, here's a close-up of the back of the board, and you'll see right above the chip, right above the processor, there's 2 rows of 3 of these. Okay. Let's see how close we can get in there. Oh yeah, that's nice. Okay, we are picking the left row of chips. I'm sorry, the left row of pins that come out of there. Let me see if I can get this turned just a little bit so you can see the length of those pins. You see that, and you want this exposed on this side. You want the right ones exposed, and you want, we're going to bring this into view now. Here's your 3-wire that goes into there, and you see the lug. You see that stake lug there should point toward the other pins, okay? Stake those 2 stakes on the pins pointing toward those, just so we get the polarity right when we're doing our and we're going to put that on carefully. The pins are not the same size as the sockets in the connector, so we're going to be real careful about that. We're going to wiggle those on there real carefully. And there, it's a real tight fit. Okay, so they're in place now. You can see that. That should be the correct polarity for this. We can always change those wires on the other side if the polarity's not. So you're all set. That's your filament detector. And that's automatically, it's in the firmware. Everything's ready to go for you. You just hook that up to your to the filament detector. And if there's any changes in wiring on that, I'll go over that when we get to that part of it. So you're all set. Right now we're ready to button this thing up. One last thing, we're going to route that wire through the back. I'm just going to route that wire back through the back of the unit here. That's got to go through the chase, the same chase as the wires went through. And that's going to go all the way back where your wires come out. So you've got access, there's a lot of room around that grommet right there. And out she goes. And when we band these wires together before we button this thing up, everything should line up well. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, students, 3D printer enthusiasts, thank you for joining me today. I will give you a short demonstration on what we have accomplished here. This screen is now active, and all of your eprom settings are available on your slicer program. We'll get this warmed up. You will see we can home with the touch of a button. We can home all. We can move X, Y, or Z. (10, 5, or 1 millimeter at a time. We can home all. Or we can home each one individually. You can go back in the menu. You can preheat. You can change the temperature range, 1, 5, or 10. We have the extruder or the heat bed. You can turn those on. You can turn them down. You can turn the preheat off with the touch of a button. We go back. We have a bed leveling system which has been disabled because we have a stinger with the automatic bed leveling. You can move individual. You can change the fan speed. You can change the filament when the filament goes out. We now have capability for a filament change with this Ram's Genius board. You can go in or out with the extruder. Change how many millimeters it goes. all the settings you need that are necessary during a print. And the last but not least, you can call it a program very easily. It is a nice file system. Once you get into the file system, you can read the entire file line shows up on your file. You can confirm or cancel. You can go back to the other file. It's very easy finding the program that you want on this. No guesswork. So I thank you everyone for joining me today. This is Dr. Tronkinstein. And we will see you again when we replace a CR10 idiot brain with a genius ramp spring. We call that the son of Tronkinstein. So please join me for that, coming soon. Thank you. Stupid idiot, Igor. We put brain in you next.